Now, once again, please, can you see me and can you hear me now? Yes. Wow. Great. Woo, we managed. Hooray. Let's hope, keep your fingers crossed. How many fingers have you got? So keep all of them crossed because we need to deliver this somehow today. Okay. So let's start. So once again, welcome to my webinar. Thanks for coming and being with us and not having lost your patience waiting for me to talk to you today about language chunks in action. And I'm going to use the metaphor of operating on people and students, because when you teach teenagers, you know that in fact very often we teachers have to use certain tricks and tools and ideas to make students respond to our teaching. So for me, this is like a surgeon type of job where I operate on my students. And I use certain clinical tools to help me deal with that as much as possible. Okay, as requested, I'm going to talk to you about teaching vocabulary in relation to the use of English. And the presentation is called Language Chunks in Action, Lexical Operation. Okay, before I start, do you like teaching vocabulary and lexical chunks? Because when I ask teachers, whoever I talk to, it's usually a big yes. It's interesting. Sometimes when you ask teachers if they like teaching skills or grammar, you don't get this 100% satisfaction. It's interesting. We all love teaching vocabulary, I think. Okay, let's see how we can possibly deal with this problem. So we're going to examine what is necessary for our students to learn towards the secondary school exams. We're going to examine techniques which are helpful in teaching students vocabulary and making them aware of lexical chunks and what these chunks actually are. You need to, well, you are aware of the fact that teenage brains work slightly differently from ours. It seems that they are definitely less focused and concentrated on studies. Knowledge seems to evaporate quite quickly. And for the teenager to actually remember something, there has to be a fair amount of revision, obviously, but also, I would say, certain methods which help students remember the vocabulary. So the operation is also on our side, because we have to make sure that we perform this operation right and that the students actually remember things for as long as it is possible. I have read the following books. This was some time ago, and they have been very helpful for me in understanding what it takes to be a teenager and what it takes to learn as a teenager. So if anyone is into this kind of science of learning, memory, and psychology, you're more than welcome to use these reference books to find out more about what makes teenagers learn or not learn as successfully as we would often wish. In this talk, we're going to mainly focus on what, which is what it is that we have to teach, but primarily really on the how. So I think most teachers want to know how to do something rather than just what to do, because I think we know what. Sometimes we need more ideas for how to do something. Is this okay, do you think, for the plan for today? Finding out certain techniques. Of course, if you have something that you want to share with me, I'll be more than happy to hear your ideas. It's always nice to steal ideas from other teachers as well. Okay, I'm sure that in your beautiful country, you can also buy sweets that have different colors. Sometimes I use M&Ms. Sometimes I use sweets of sort of like, basic colors. So it's orange and red and yellow. So I have sweets. I often have a box full of sweets in my classroom. This is the box in nice green color. And sometimes I ask my students to draw one of these sweets, and once they have a sweet in their hand, I say, okay, look at the color of your sweet, and now I want you to talk about something that you have drawn. So basically, if your sweet is red, I want you to talk about the dream that you would like to come true. If your sweet is yellow, I want you to talk about another job that you could do, for example, or another activity you would like to take up, etc. This is a very good idea for the lesson beginning. You know, teenagers need to often wake up and switch from one subject to another. It is simpler for us adults. It's not so easy for teenagers to switch from maths or something else to another subject, in our case, English. So this is something that's going to wake them up, certainly. And they quite like the idea. Sometimes if I don't have sweets, I use colorful pieces of paper. It works just as well. This activity is called pair work tablets, because I often put them in pairs, and they should have different colored sweets, and they have to share these ideas in pairs. However, what I also find quite useful is to use the same activity based on the work that we have just done in the course book. This is something I have invented, but this is something that comes from the book Get to 100, where collocations and lexical chunks are actually exploited to the full. I'm the author of that book, so because I'm crazy about lexical chunks and vocabulary, so there's plenty of it. So instead of using your own ideas, you can basically try to come up with similar questions or points for the students to discuss. In this case, these collocations all refer to traveling. As you can see, there are different items, and instead of talking about this, which we have been through, okay, I want my students to discuss something like this. Yeah, so red, instead of dream that you would like to come true, you talk about, would you like to go on a boat trip, of course, and why, etc. Yes, yellow, do you like sightseeing tours? As you can see, these collocations that students have just practiced are embedded in those questions. Yes, sightseeing tours, but boat trips. Because my students get used to inventing their own activities sooner or later, when they are used to this technique, I will give them just some options, like for example for the red sweet and the yellow sweet, and then would like them, before the discussion starts, to actually come up with something nice for a blue sweet, green one, and orange sweet. Okay, so they come up with their own questions here using the target vocabulary from the book that we have covered. It's obviously communication. They crave for communication. Teenagers like talking, as you know, and it's a good way of revising vocabulary with students. Now, collocations are obviously tremendously important, because in most state school exams across the world, there are multiple choice tasks where students are asked simply to choose the right answer based on the collocation type. Like in this case, for example, yes, the success of how you do in the exam depends on whether you know how certain expressions work in English or you don't. Yeah, so it's worth always to practice language in collocation. So in a sense, you are this sort of guardian angel. In this case, you can see this guardian surgeon who is sort of giving students tasks to make the operation sweeter, let's say, yes, more helpful for their brains as such. I would also say that the same activity could be done with words that you find after each unit of Get to 100, where in many cases, vocabulary is not just individual words, although there are also individual items, but in most cases, vocabulary is grouped. Yeah, so you can see not just a fan or hopeless or keen, but you actually can see the whole expression, which I find extremely helpful to remember vocabulary. It's also recorded, as you can see, so it's something that students can listen and practice as well, and have a sweet at the same time. So it's nice. And again, students can come up with their own questions based on the color of the sweet. Yeah. So sometimes it's good to use, as you know, something that is sort of fun-like with your learners. I always advocate, proper teaching and serious studying as well. This is, after all, secondary school, and they're preparing for the exam. However, knowing the teenage brain and how it works, sometimes we make them laugh and enjoy the activity. And one of activities that has worked for me for a long time has been the following, and I'll show you this one. First of all, you ask your students to think of activities which parents want their teenage children to do. This is an excellent opportunity to revise, for example, household chores, vocabulary to do with household duties, like you can see in the picture. So, for example, make the bed, take the rubbish out, and etc. This is what parents often ask their teenage students to do. Of course, there are lots more of these activities. This is just an example. So, first of all, students come up with their examples of household activities. So we make a list on the board, of course, and then I say, okay, and what would you like to do instead? So we make a column of what they are asked to do, another column of what they would like to do, and we compare, contrast, and then choose the worst from the list on the left and the best from the list on the right. Now, to finish off, I show them this cartoon. It's a great cartoon that shows the anatomy of a teenager's brain. Please have a look at it. That's what happens in their brain. And I asked them to draw their own brain, obviously, using this as a template, or just draw their own brain. And then I want them to do the same, say what is on your brain, what activities you are interested in doing. Yeah, so please copy the brain and tell me what you are interested in doing. And again, I insist on using lexical chunks and collocations, so they can't say just music or dancing. They have to say going to the club or listening to music, etc. So you insist on that. It's something that they quite enjoy, to be honest. Yes, the smallest section is school. Yes, as you can see. The smallest section is indeed school. But that's typical of teenagers. And I think when we were at school, perhaps we were exactly the same. We just don't remember what we were like when we were at school. So it's good fun for the learners to do. Okay. Another thing that is quite important, I believe, and is the same in Ukraine, it's word formation. It's not easy for Polish learners. Is it easy for your learners? Word formation? No, because yes, exactly. There's a sort of like huge number of prefixes and suffixes that are so different from our native tongues. Yes, exactly. So it's very confusing for the students unless something is very common and they know it. But apart from this, is actually not so easy. No, not at all. For most students, of course. Now. Again, in Get to 100, I have tried to include as many adjectives of this word formation tasks, perhaps, as possible, because I believe that this is what creates your lexical power, in a sense. Because if, as a learner, you know that you can say, for example, honest and dishonest, you may say it's one word, really, because the meaning is what it is. But in fact, it's knowing two words. Yes, if you learn honesty on top, then you know three words from the same root. So your vocabulary, in a sense, expands. Yes. So this sort of word formation operation is also quite important for our students to do. It's also, when you think about it, and trying to smuggle in the knowledge about word formation, it doesn't always have to be explicit, because in this case, it's actually pretty explicit, as you can see. Yes, there is the adjective and the prefix. In this case, it's actually quite implicit, because what the students have to do simply is to match up the words with the sentences without actually looking so explicitly at the particular suffix in this case. So it's worried, but nervous, and etc. So they can work on word formation both explicitly and implicitly as well. I also like when Word formation is again smuggled into speaking activities. But again, not to make it too easy for the learner, I create questions, and instead of giving the adjectives, as you can see myself, yes, so there is no adjective, no adjective, no adjective, etc. I get the students, first of all, to complete the questions with proper adjectives and then discuss the question. So in a sense, it's double impact because they have the question, they have to create the right form, yes, and then discuss using the words that they have created. So you can imagine that the input that they get is actually doubled, if not tripled. So it's a little trick that I often use with my students, and it works. Okay, right. Again, why word formation? Word formation tasks often appear during state exams or Cambridge exams. And as we said, it's not that easy for the students. So students need to practice word formation in textual forms as well. But before they get to practice this in such a long text, they really need a lot of input beforehand, sort of little individual exercises which they can practice. Okay, another activity which I often use with my students is the following. Can you now imagine you are speaking on behalf of your students, and you can see the following adjectives here on the left. They all begin with letter D. They don't have to begin with the same letter. And I come into the class and I say, "Oh, class, today I have some adjectives for you to practice." And if you agree with the fact that this adjective actually somehow summarizes your personality, describes who you are, then please clap your hands or raise your hand. So, for example, I say, "Are you disorganized?" And then the students clap their hands if they feel they are disorganized. "Are you distracted?" And again, they clap their hands if they feel they are distracted. Okay, I won't hear your clapping, but are your students disorganized? You can clap your hands if you think so. Are your students distracted? Are your students often dead tired? Are your students determined? Are your students devoid of ambition? And are your students disciplined? Okay, etc. So it's a nice sort of kinetic type of an exercise to, again, activate certain vocabulary, which, as you can see, is also word formation based. Sometimes when I'm looking for inspiration, like most teachers, I go online and I found this great page. It's called Boom Positive. Don't know if you know Boom Positive or not, but it's full of very positive adjectives, so it's good to use. And if I'm stuck for adjectives or sometimes material to use, I go to Boom Positive and I look for vocabulary, which there is grouped according to a particular letter. So it's sometimes you can have a lesson based on D words, for example, which again helps you memorize things if they begin with the same letter. So we do that quite often. Okay, you may find similar activities in Get to 100. This one is a simple communication task where the students have to decide if they feel they are generous, reliable, tidy, patient, honest, etc., talkative, and explain this to their friends. Again, you may want to begin the lesson by asking the students to open their books, look at exercise 14, and again, clap your hands, raise your hand, whatever the signal, if you feel you are talkative, reliable, generous, etc. Again, it wakes them up because they need to be somehow made more active in class. So it's all there in the book as well, okay? Which I think I quite like. Okay, it's not also in the vocabulary section that you find these activating bits. We also made sure that in the listening and reading sections of the book, there are similar activities where, again, similar adjectives are being shown to the students again and reinforced, and students can practice them again and again until they're blue in the face, really. So that's part of the deal. Okay, so this is the sort of operation wake the students up type of activity. Okay, another thing is awareness, and I care about awareness, and I want my students to to realize what's going to happen to them, like before a surgery, yes, when you are on the operating table, and beforehand usually you are told what's going to happen to you and what you have to learn in this case to learn, but in a medical situation what's going to happen to your body, etc. So now I want my students to know what's going to happen to the mind and how much of this vocabulary, these lexical chunks, they will have to actually learn and take in the course of 4 years before the exam. In Poland, it is 4 years now. Okay, so I make my students aware of the following. I say, look, in the next 4 years, you're going to be learning a lot of lexical chunks, and these lexical chunks may be phrasal verbs. They're pretty hard. They may be confusing words which students often confuse because they often false friends or simply they sound the same, yes? So just different. I want you to be aware of basic and more extreme adjectives, yes? So this is something else you have to be aware of, that it exists in English. It's part of English and part of what you will have to learn. I also want the students to realize that there will be a lot of work, as you can see here, on those confusing words. They're also confusing very often for native speakers, like historic and historical. Yes, again, this is both word formation, but also may appear, for example, in a multiple choice task, the choice between historic, historical, and something else, and history. So it's worth pointing out how much of that the students will have to learn. It's also explore things like similar meanings, because these words, as you know, I mean, they're all different, obviously, but when they appear in collocations, suddenly the difference doesn't seem so obvious to students. It's worth working on compounds. Yes, again, this is creating new vocabulary, and this is again vocabulary that may be exploited in the exam, or they may need to use this vocabulary basically to write or say something, describe a situation in the exam. So it's actually worth making students aware, basically, of what it means to know English and English chunks. Now, to do that, I have to prepare the patient and tell my students what's what. In English, not in English, in life, we talk about the so-called lots and hots. Do you know what these two stand for? Does anyone recognize these acronyms, lots and hots? It comes from theories of cognition. Yes, lower and higher order thinking skills. Yes, Irina, well done. Lots means lower order thinking skills, and hots means exactly higher order thinking skills. And all I want to say is that lots is about remembering words, about understanding words and applying words. So you remember the meaning, you understand what it means, you can use it. Hots means you can analyze more than just the meaning. I'll show you an example. You can evaluate if the word was a positive or negative, what connotation it has. And finally, you can use the word creatively. Well, it depends on the level of your students. The higher they go in their education, the more hots are expected of them. This is not to say that this is not important. This is equally important. But the higher the level, the more hots are expected of your students. So what do I do? I ask them to think about what questions are important to ask about vocabulary. And we have slim questions or thin questions, and we also have fat questions. Yes, fat questions. And let me give you examples of what these slim and fat questions are. Let's think about the word operate, as this is the metaphor for today. We're operating. So skinny questions are basic questions about a particular word. So operate, what does it mean? How do we pronounce it? What part of speech is it? And can you use it in a sentence? These are questions I often ask my students, basic questions at the beginning when I introduce vocabulary. The higher I go, the more fat we become. And I say, okay, does it mean the same in English or in Polish, in your case? Ukrainian. What can you operate? And then you go into collocations, lexical chunks, because you not just operate on a patient, but you can also operate a machine in English, yes? What other parts of speech can you make from it? So what other words can you create? This is word formation. And can you use it in a sentence, each time showing the words different meaning? Yeah, so very high skill. It's up to you to choose some words that you want to give this particular treatment. So obviously you don't have time to give this treatment to 50 words or 20 words in one lesson. Yes, but basically you need to choose which words you want to treat in that very way. Yes, some of you are saying it's Bloom's. It is Bloom's. Bloom has started that concept. Yes, indeed. It's something that goes back to his time. It has been then rewritten by a few other people. But yes, I agree, of course. But yes, it encourages them to think more creatively about vocabulary. And I always use words which are particularly difficult for my students, and I treat them like this, yes, in a more complex way. The same happens when you think about different meanings of the same word. Yes, like the word pass in English means so many different things. Our students usually know pass as pass an exam, but then again, as you know, because you teachers, it has more than one meaning. Again, this awareness is not something the students are born with. If they don't know this, they simply won't know it. As simple as that. So you encourage students to explore words of this kind. Yes, they can make nice posters for the classroom, for example. Write the word cause in the middle and then like a spidergram about different meanings and examples of how these words are used for classroom walls. Yes, so again, it makes it more memorable. Okay, this takes us to something that is very important, and this is Operation Paraphrase. So we've been through Operation Wake Them Up, then Operation Awareness, and now is Operation Paraphrase. Now, to know English, to know any language, paraphrase is crucial because it's all based on paraphrase. Whatever you read or listen to, it's transformations in the use of English. It's all about paraphrasing. I often ask my students the following. I show them a very short text like this one. Can you read it, please? Willy Wonka. As you can see, it's very simple. And I want it to be simple. Even for higher levels, I want it to be simple because I want to show them how paraphrase works, really. So I asked them, first of all, to paraphrase all the words in different colors. So how else can you say that he was famous? How else can you say delicious, children and adults, and loved to eat it? As you can see, we don't just learn to paraphrase one word. Please note. We teach them how to paraphrase chunks of language as well, and they work on it. Sometimes it's easier, sometimes it's harder, and then we may arrive at this solution. Yes, Willy Wonka was known throughout the world because people enjoyed eating. So you're also playing with grammar. Can you see that? The tasty candy he made. Yeah. So it's something that students like, and you need to choose a short text because it's at least 10 minutes of your lesson for that. But again, it shows them, it builds something in their heads that helps them with paraphrasing skills so necessary for the use of English, as I said, for example, transformations. Yeah. Now, sometimes the paraphrase that they need is going to be very small. We call it cosmetic surgery. So they will just have to change one word, maybe add a preposition or something. But sometimes the paraphrase needed for the exam purposes is going to be more of plastic surgery, where the change is greater. So I encourage my students to do the following. Well, I don't know Ukraine, sadly. Maybe one day I'll learn. But can I ask you, please, on a piece of paper, if you have one, or in your heads, translate these two sentences into your language. So can you please, from English, put it into Ukrainian? You can write it for me in the chat box, or maybe I'll learn how to say I like my job in your language. Would be lovely. Okay. Mnie nравится moja работа. Correct? Mnie nравится моя or moja работа. Podobaється. To so like in Polish. Podoba mi się moja praca. Oh, lovely. Ja lubię moją robotę. Oh, lovely. Well, maybe, actually, perhaps you could run a webinar for me and teach me Ukraine. Cool, I like that. Yes, brilliant. Okay, anyway, I give the students these sentences in Polish, so in their native language, not in English. They have to be in your case, in Ukrainian, okay? These sentences. And with lower level students, I say, okay, I want you to work in pairs or groups, and I want you to paraphrase one word from each sentence, but make sure you keep the meaning. Yes, the meaning is retained. So in this case, they can say, I enjoy my job. Okay, obviously from Ukraine, they have to translate the sentence into basic English and then paraphrase the sentence from English into English. Okay, so first of all, it's Ukrainian, translate into English, and then the basic English sentence, replace one word. And again, it's they create lots of things because it's I enjoy my job. Sometimes they say I enjoy what I do. Yes, I enjoy my profession, etc. When they are more capable, they know more language, you can get them to replace two words each time, or even replace all of the words in that sentence. So, for example, what I do is my favorite pastime. Yes, but then again, you need students with higher language abilities. But again, this is paraphrasing. This is preparing students for writing tasks, speaking tasks, and use of English tasks because of transformations that they will have to deal with in the exam. Yeah. Is this clear? I enjoy my job. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Do you enjoy your jobs, by the way? I love teaching, so I hope you do too. You wouldn't be here if you didn't. And you wouldn't wait so long for me to actually speak to you if you didn't like your job. Yes, good. Okay, another exercise which helps you to become clinical with vocabulary is the following one. It's connected with word formation as well as transformations. Have a look at these sentences, please. Read them. Okay, and now I want you to, like I would like my students, I want you to make other words from the words in blue. So from succeed, I want you to make other words like success or what else could you make? Obviously successful, unsuccessful, it's also okay to create. Good. From improve, improvement, possibly improving. Okay. From impressive, you could make, they have to be from the same root. So boost would not be good because it's in a sense a synonymous expression, but the same stem. So impression, yes. Impressed, unimpressed. Good. And graduation, and a person who graduates is called a graduate, etc. Yeah. Okay. So I give these sentences to my students and I take them through the same process and I say, look, please transform, read the sentences and then transform each of the words into as many words as you possibly can. And now use these words to transform the sentence, keeping the meaning as close as possible. So you must work hard to succeed. When we created the word successful, you would say you must work hard to be successful. Yes? Okay. What can I do to improve my English? Okay, that's harder because we've made improvement. So if we have the noun improvement, we need to add something to make it a chunk. Yeah, so we make improvement. What can I do to make improvements to my English? Yeah, so students work on these sentences like that. The show was not too impressive. I was not impressed by the show too much. This is higher level practice for your students, but it helps them again manipulate the words, negotiate how these words should look in the sentence. Yeah. Okay, so that's how it is. Now, as you can see here, it's a task which again, helps students to paraphrase, in this case, grammar. There's a task like this in our exam. I don't know if you have a task like this in your exam, but even if it isn't part of your exam, it's again worth using in the classroom as an activity simply, because the students have to read the original sentence, as you can see, and then find the right paraphrase among the three given sentences. Again, in some cases, you can make it more obvious. In some cases, you can make it tricky. It depends on how hard the operation you want to be. But it's very useful in terms of understanding how grammar works, and that different words in English can actually explain or describe exactly the same. Yeah, so that's useful. All of this is very useful for preparing students to begin to paraphrase for the exam purposes. Transformations are none other but practice in paraphrasing, knowing grammar and lexical chunks to be able to paraphrase sentences. So the quicker you use them to paraphrasing, working on paraphrase, they have to be used to this way of thinking, if you know what I mean. It's not just a question of language, it's also what they create in their brains. Yes, I know I have to paraphrase, I know what I'm supposed to do. This kind of philosophy. So it's where it takes them eventually. I also often do the following exercise. This is very useful. As you can see, these are synonyms in English. Again, there are no real synonyms. In some cases, of course, you can have a one-to-one synonym, but in many cases, it doesn't work like this. And what I often do with higher level students, sort of more extended levels, I, for example, ask them to use the word, I don't know, let's say something simple. The house was damaged. Okay, let's start with the first example. Why not? The house was damaged, and I say, okay, these are the synonyms: hurt and harm. Can you possibly rewrite that sentence, the house was damaged, using the words hurt and harm? Can you say that the house was hurt? The house was harmed? No, you can't. Okay, but the task was easy. Can you say that the task was simple? Of course you can. So then again, you see, you get the students to come up with sentences using one column, and then ask them to paraphrase, if possible, the sentences using the words from the other column. It is really an eye-opener for the students, because they use and misuse synonyms. They use dictionaries, they check online, and they assume that damage may mean the same as harm. Okay, that depart always means the same as exit. They cannot be used like this in a sentence. So with high-level students, it's a very useful cognitive sort of exercise for the students. Okay, so again, it's you and your responsibility. You are this guardian surgeon helping students come up with ideas. Okay, to finish off, I want to share with you some ideas I use with my students for revision. Teenage brains need revision. This table is not from Get to 100. No, I found it online. If you put in a table with synonyms, it comes up. I use it with my students actually a lot as an additional exercise. Now, I want to share with you these activities for revising the language, because the key to the teenage brain is actually revision. And I don't know if you are familiar with this very game. Are you familiar with a game called Kaboom? I know you like Kahoots and Quizlet and all of these. This one is called Kaboom. Some people say it's a very cruel game, but students like it. So let me explain how it works. Students have to draw something like this, okay, from A, B, C, D, and 1, 2, 3, 4. And then decide where they want to put question marks, letter K and letter B. Now, question mark is a question that they will have to come up with, and this is worth 50 points. B says bonus, so simply if you choose B, you get 50 points for nothing. because you were lucky enough. It's luck, like in cards. And K for kaboom is you lose all of your points. So strategically speaking, I tell my students, use a maximum of 3 Bs, because your partner will be able to score 50 points each. So this is 150 points. And don't use too many kabooms, because it will kill the game. So 3 kabooms are enough, because if somebody chooses D4, for example, they will lose 50 points. That's a lot. Now, once they have drawn this and they have decided where they want the question marks, Ks and Bs, I ask the students to come up with questions for their partner about the meaning or the use of certain lexical chunks. So, for example, they have the word, I don't know, how to say make the bed in Ukrainian. I don't know. Unsurprisingly. Make the bed. Make the bed. So imagine that we choose this expression, okay? Make the bed. Krawat, okay. That's all. Okay, it's too fast now. It's just lots of you are writing. Okay, some of you are using this. Some of you are using kravats, and some of you are using. Okay, interesting. I'll explore this later when I rewatch it for my own enjoyment. Okay, anyway, so imagine the question that your student might come with is the question like, do you do the bed or do you make the bed? Yes, that's the question that they make for their partner. Do you say dishonest or unhonest, for example? So they make questions for their partner. Yes, so there's individual work where students decide how many questions they want to make for their partner. And as you can imagine, then the students work in pairs, choose the squares. So they, for example, say A1, and then they get the question about make the bed. And if they get the answer right, then it's 50 points. But if they choose A2, then it's kaboom, they've lost their 50 points. If they choose A4, it's bonus, and they have gained 50 points. Is it clear, guys? Yes? This game. Yes? You know, yes, I don't have to re-explain. Okay, it's a simple game, yes, but it's very dynamic, and you lose and gain. Alternatively, students like that a lot. Okay, another type of activity which I often use with my students is playing with mazes or labyrinths. And this one is the following. We work on collocations and lexical chunks. And for example, let's stick with the verb make. So I tell my students, look, we're going to work on collocations with make. And in before the lesson, I use this labyrinth, this maze, and I put around the labyrinth words which are connected with make. So, for example, make the bed, make a phone call, yes, etc. They are there going round until the very exit. Yes, so these words are there. I don't tell them how many are correct options and how many are incorrect options. And their task is again to work individually or in pairs to collect only the good ones. So the number, let's say 20, and they have to tell me we found 20. If they find 19 or 11 or 23, that's obviously wrong answers. Once you show them how this activity works, next time, third time, fourth time, they can prepare such a maze for their friends. Yeah, it's again teenage, active brain, hands busy, so maybe they won't be reaching for their mobile phones that often. Okay, so that's another one that I use very often for revision, especially vocabulary and chunks. Another great activity I like. Are you familiar with this activity where you use fly swats? You know, these swats that we use to kill flies. I assume you have as many flies as we have in this country. And I keep some of these fly swats at home. And the activity is that you put on the board, as you can see here. This is how it started with kids, but it works with teenagers equally well, really. You put on the board different expressions that you want to revise. They could be singular words, they could be expressions, and you put students in pairs. They are competing, so this is a competition. There's one team and another team. Two students come to the front and compete against one another. And the teacher gives the explanation, the definition of the particular expression on the board, and who is the first to swat wins this expression. You practice this activity. I'm glad that you do. And when it's finished, basically, I never get rid of these words. So, these groups have got points, and somebody is the winner, usually one team, or sometimes there's a draw. Then students sit down, and in pairs again, I want them to go through the whole list once again and try to use these expressions in sentences or mini dialogues, again for reinforcement. Sometimes I find that students, the teachers use activities just once, and after they've finished this activity, sit down and that's it. Again, I tend to use the same vocabulary again and again until the end of the lesson, so that it becomes simply more memorable for the students, again, as reinforcement. If you are creative and you like your students to write poems, are you familiar with this page, Poem Generator? It's actually brilliant. We don't have the time to create poetry now, but there are different kinds of poems that your students can easily create. You need the internet. It's online, an online application. And there are, as you can see, various poems that you can create very simply by simply putting in certain words, and the application creates a poem for you. It's brilliant because the students don't actually have to write poems themselves, but they can practice the words, or you can practice the words that you want them to remember in the form of a poem. So I do recommend this from time to time as a break from your everyday routine. Something I'm sure you're familiar with, I may have shown this to you as well, word wheel. Does anyone remember this? Do you remember that? Because before, I think I've shown you this using dice, where different dots on the dice correspond to different tasks that your students have to perform. Since then, I have been using both dice, but also these spinners. We cut them out, piece of paper like that. We cut them out and we put a pin here and simply spin them on the table. It's a variety, teenagers, when they get used to dice, they find dice boring, so I had to find something else, and I found that spinner that was actually ready made for me by somebody else from E is for Explore, another wonderful website you can use. How it works is the same as it does with dice. First of all, students choose words for their partner, and they have to choose these words in a sensible way, not a stupid way. So they have to find the expressions, lexical chunks, which can be acted, which can be drawn, which rhyme with something, can be defined. There is an antonym or synonym for, that can be used in a sentence, or obviously you can say what part of speech it is if it's an individual word. So first of all, your students choose words sensibly and appropriately for their partner. When they have done this and you check that it's okay, then they can play the spinner game. And each time the partner, for example, ends up on the draw section, you give them the words from your list. Okay, I want you to draw, make the bed, for example, and they have to draw. So again, it's something that the students can easily do. Yeah. So I don't know if you play this game or not. Simply a variety on dice. Okay, I'll be coming to the end of this presentation. I hope that in the time I was given, I have managed to show you how to be clinical with vocabulary, how to raise awareness of vocabulary, but also show you how to use lexical chunks more creatively. Generally, creativity helps students to experiment. If they're not afraid to be creative in the classroom, it generally helps them in life to make decisions faster, not to be afraid to guess, because they know they won't be judged by that. So there are a number number of activities like that in Get to 100 where we try to use vocabulary as creatively as possible. I call this, to be honest, brain lotion, because our students need something that is going to make this operation of learning smoother and easier and more pleasant and sometimes less stressful, etc. So this, whatever is creative, more fun oriented, is like brain lotion for our students. I don't know how many of you use that book. I would always welcome any feedback from you, the teachers in Ukraine, what we can do better when we do the rewrite of the book. And I hope that I'll be in touch with you again. And I hope that this presentation has helped you to get some ideas on how to work with teenagers and especially deal with the knowledge of lexical chunks. I hope this operation wasn't too painful for you in the end, and thanks for your patience and waiting and everything, and just enjoy the rest of your day and holiday if you're still on holiday. Okay, thank you very much.